Every so often, while doing research for a painting, such as this early view of Buffalo, New York, I come across a story that I find so fascinating that I would like to share it with others. One such story takes place along the Niagara frontier in the early years of the 19th century. At this time, the Great Lakes above Niagara Falls were still surrounded by a forest wilderness of a vastness that is hard to comprehend. And the tall cities of today were at their humblest beginnings. Buffalo, New York was hardly more than 80 buildings located near the mouth of the Niagara River and the gateway to the upper Great Lakes. Erie, Pennsylvania consisted of almost 100 buildings, cradled deep in the arms of the Presque Peninsula. And Cleveland, Ohio was but a peppering of dwellings where the Cuyahoga River snakes into Lake Erie. Buffalo, Erie, Cleveland, these were but seedling villages planted in clearings hacked out of the forest. Toledo, Ohio had yet to be named, and it consisted of only one building and the ruins of an abandoned fort. While Chicago was but a distant military outpost on the shores of a prairie ocean. Only Detroit, which had been settled by the French in the early 1700s, had any real substance. Both sides of the Detroit River were quilted with small fields of prosperous farms, and the town itself, with its high palisades and Fort Shelby, was by far the most developed area on the upper Great Lakes. Although settlers had been trickling into these lands since before the American Revolution, they had yet to make an impact. For most areas of the wilderness, it was still a land of the woodland Indian and the fur trade. Our story involves a pioneer steamboat, which was built and put into service with great difficulty into this vast wilderness, and of two villages, Black Rock and Buffalo, which were locked in a war of commerce. The village from which this steamboat sailed would influence greatly which village would become the major port through which the impending wealth of the upper Great Lakes would flow. The stakes were high. Great fortunes were to be made, and the inhabitants of these two villages knew it well. The Walk in the Water, when built in 1818, was a remarkable craft. She had a huge boiler with 1/3 of it above the deck, and with a square crosshead engine of 65 horsepower. Her regular service was back and forth from Black Rock to Detroit. In a sense, our story is a lover's triangle, with the Walk in the Water at the apex, while below the two suitors, the village of Black Rock and the village of Buffalo. So let's take a look at these two rivals and see how this conflict came about. For like any good triangle story, it begins before the female lead takes the stage.
It's been over 200 years since the War of 1812 raged back and forward over the Niagara frontier. The Peace Bridge symbolizes the enduring friendship which has existed between the United States and Canada since that time. However, as those first years of peace settled over this war-torn land and the settlers drifted back to the devastated frontier villages, a new struggle took its place. This war was between the village of Buffalo and the village of Black Rock. And this war would determine which would become the center of industry and commerce at this crucial gateway to the upper Great Lakes. And unlike the War of 1812, this war would be a winner-take-all.
The results of this war between the villages can be seen all too well from the Peace Bridge itself. For on the right side of the bridge there is a proud vista of the city of Buffalo as she faces westward to the wealth of the upper Great Lakes, while on the left side of the Peace Bridge is a random scatter of residential and light industry, without a sign of the vanquished Black Rock. With one exception, if we look very, very closely past the hustle and din of modern-day traffic, we can just see the remains of the great Black Rock from which the village got its name.
Not much to look at today, but in 1817, this was a landmark of note. The original Black Rock was destroyed to make way for the Erie Canal. But before that time, the Black Rock protruded deep into the Niagara River and offered protection from the currents that raced through these narrows. Of course, the original Black Rock had the weathering of the ages and not the pristine gray which we see today.
The rock itself consists mainly of large pieces of black chert, an impure flint-like stone. The Black Rock was not only the departure point for the ferry, which carried passengers and wagons to and from Canada, but it was also the site of taverns catering to both the ferry and the lake trade. The village of Black Rock was located downstream from the Black Rock itself, scattered along the east bank of the Niagara River. Its most outstanding building was the mansion of General Peter Porter, which stood until 1911, when it was razed to enlarge a factory. The Porter Mansion hosted such men as John Quincy Adams, Millard Fillmore, Grover Cleveland, DeWitt Clinton, Henry Clay, Lafayette, Daniel Webster, and the list goes on and on of the famous of the day. To the north of the village, in the slack water caused by Squaw Island, was the harbor of Black Rock. Here the brigs and schooners bound for points west were loaded. A little further to the north is Gajaquita Creek and its basin that offered shelter from winter ice for shipping, and where the Black Rock shipyards were located. Here at the Black Rock shipyards, most of the schooners and brigs for the trade on the Great Lakes were built and maintained. Black Rock Harbor and its shipyards were a cog in an extensive commercial monopoly that controlled the upper Great Lakes. The owners of this monopoly were General Peter Porter, Judge Augustus Porter, and Major Benjamin Barton. And this monopoly was based on controlling this: Niagara Falls. While not controlling the falls itself so much as the land around it, for the Porter brothers had acquired large tracts of land at key places along the Niagara River, so that they could control the goods that were hauled from the lower Niagara River up the Niagara Escarpment, past Niagara Falls, to the upper Niagara River. And in the early 1800s, this was the only means of getting goods from back east to out west. Just 2 miles through the forest, on the road that would later be called Niagara Street, was the village of Buffalo. The British forces had come down this road in the 1812 war to put Buffalo to the torch. But by 1817, the village was mostly rebuilt. The village of Buffalo, confident in its future, had built a large county hall in 1816 and could boast of 2 fine hotels. The village was championed by Judge Samuel Wilkerson, who strongly believed that Buffalo had the potential of a great port despite a sandbar that blocked the entrance to the river. All attempts to open a deep-water channel through the sandbar for shipping had failed miserably due to Lake Erie storms which destroyed early breakwaters and refilled the channel with sand. Buffalo was thus more orientated to the wagon trade, which passed through Buffalo Village to follow the primitive road along the south shore of Lake Erie.